Inspiration, clarity, confidence, and wholehearted growth strategies. Welcome to Your Next Chapter, the show especially for women discovering, deepening, and expanding their next chapters in business and life. If this is you, then hit subscribe now. I'm your host, Angela Rasmus, and I'm so glad you're here. Hello and welcome to episode 102 of the podcast. I hope you're having an exceptional day wherever you are and that you're ready for a dose of inspiration from my guest and I today. Well, have you ever found yourself in a situation that you really didn't expect? That you've been knocked for a bit of a sixer and you have to step up and dust yourself off and get started again? Well, if that's been your experience, then today's guest is going to be very inspirational for you. Now, Tracey Bissett is the founder of Bissett Financial Fitness over in Toronto in Canada. And Tracey is on a mission to redefine the economic future of the world. And she is doing that by addressing the financial fitness of young adults and entrepreneurs. But it wasn't always like that, which often happens in these conversations, doesn't it? Now, Tracey faced redundancy not that long ago, just a couple of years ago, something that I've also faced much further in the distance. That was 20 years ago, but it is something that does happen in the corporate world and we don't always talk about it. But there's the flip side of that shock as well, and that is the ability for it to open a new door for you. That idea that perhaps I can take these skills and turn them into something new. And that's exactly what Tracey did, actually after a conversation with her dad who made the suggestion, and she started having a closer look at the option. So some of the things that we discuss in this conversation that will be really valuable is understanding how you can transfer your skills and your confidence from previous chapters into the next one. We talk about overcoming perfectionism and how when you do that, it ensures that you can move forward and grow. We also discuss how isolation can be really dangerous no matter what stage of business you are at and how important it is to spend time with people on the same journey. And we also looked at a really interesting notion, how you can create a small board of directors for yourself who can help you make strong decisions and stay very aligned with your vision and that growth strategy. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. And there is so much in this conversation that will be useful, whether you are on the cusp of a next chapter or whether you have already taken that step forward and you're working beautifully in your current business and are looking for growth and new directions. So I hope you really enjoy the conversation and let's jump straight into it. Hello there and welcome to another episode of the Your Next Chapter podcast. My name's Angela and today we have the pleasure of a conversation with Tracey Bissett, who is all the way over in Toronto, Canada, one of my favorite places in the world when I visited last year. And I'm excited to have this conversation because Tracey has one of those fabulous examples of where a previous chapter has opened the door into the next chapter, the move from being in the corporate world to stepping out into your own business. And that is something we can certainly all learn from. So Tracey, thank you so much for sharing your time here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have and really excited to be on the other side of the microphone.
Yeah, it makes a nice change, doesn't it? You and I we've just hit that milestone respectively with ticking over the 100 episodes in our podcast. So yeah, I agree. I love getting on the other side of the mic as well. So I'm sure this will be a juicy conversation for our listeners.
Absolutely.
So what I'd love to do is have an understanding of the previous chapters that you have journeyed through to bring you to this point. I mean, we pick up so much wisdom and knowledge and lessons that we can bring through into our current chapters. And with you working in the corporate space and then establishing your own Bissett Financial Fitness is a story that has a lot of depth to it. So I'd love to understand, where did it begin? Tell me what the previous chapters looked like.
For sure. And so I'm going to go way back to when I was a kid, probably 7, 8 years old. And I lived in Nova Scotia, which is on the far east coast of Canada. And my family had everything that we needed. We weren't lacking for anything, but we didn't have a lot of extra money. And my best friend and I always wanted to go to the store. We wanted to get some treats. And so we designed all kinds of entrepreneurial activities like giving children lessons, to creating a newspaper called Flashy News, to whatever you could imagine so we could get some extra money to go get our slushies or our bag of chips at the store. So fast forward, I'm now in high school. Now I've gotten into a program called Junior Achievement, which is a program where you create your own company and I was top salesperson for a bunch of different products, a bunch of different companies over the years. And so I really was liking this entrepreneur thing. I went to business school. I have a Bachelor of Commerce and an MBA. And when I got out of school, I got hired by a big Canadian bank. So in Canada, we pretty much have 5 major banks. So I got hired by one of them. And I thought, I'll work here for a couple of years and see how it goes. And 2 years turned into 16 years. And so I had lots of promotions, lots of different opportunities to do different jobs, worked with some amazing people. And kind of around the 10-year mark, I had the opportunity to move to the other end of Canada, out on the, not quite the West Coast, but to Western Canada, and really experience a part of the country I'd never been in before. So that was a big change. And then I came back to Toronto. Had a couple more jobs, and then unfortunately my job was eliminated. So that prompted me to take a pause and see what was going to be my next step.
That point actually comes for quite a few people that I've spoken with, and my own experience. If I go way back to, I was 30 and I worked in News Limited for a long time, and then after I had my first child and different things happened, and the opportunity for redundancy came up, and that exactly the same as you. It suddenly opens a door to having to think of, well, where might I go from there? And I think that's when sometimes we look at oftentimes we look at the skill base that we have and go, what can I do with this and what's calling me? Was that how it happened for you?
Not quite so clearly, I wouldn't say. I must have been unconsciously. I purposely didn't create a resume. And people started calling me and they wanted to get me into jobs that I had just come out of. And I knew there was a market for me to be able to go back into another bank. With my skill set, it was really around risk management and approving loans for corporate customers, commercial customers, helping structure deals. And so I knew there was a demand for the skills, but I wasn't sure if that was going to be the right thing for me. So I just kept telling people I didn't have my resume ready. So I made my way through outplacement. I did all those surveys about yourself, find your skills, met with lots and lots of people. And then one day my dad said, why don't you think about doing your own thing? Like that might be a fun change. And so I gave it some thought and spent a lot of time actually figuring out, well, if I do my own thing, what am I going to do? And eventually that's where I landed. So I started Bissett Financial Fitness, which gives me most of the things that I enjoyed before from my job. I'm really passionate about helping people with financial matters, whether it be young adults or entrepreneurs. And so I was able to take all the stuff I knew. I also had been very active in the learning and development department within the bank, helping young lenders learn how to structure deals, talk to customers. And so I was able to teach that teaching piece as well. And it just seemed like a good fit to go out and try it on my own, while at the same time controlling my destiny a little bit for the future, because usually everything I put my mind to, I'm able to make it work. Not that it's easy, but certainly I'm able to ask for help, overcome obstacles, and make it work. So I thought if I could control my future for the rest of my career, might be better than going back to another role where there's going to be redundancy again. And that's just the way that Canadian financial services is.
And it's interesting that catalyst moment when it was your dad who said, well, what about doing your own thing? Had that come into your mind before then, or was it more of a, once someone had prompted you, that door began to open in your own mind?
A couple of people had talked to me about it, but it was really when my dad said it and I kind of laughed it off. But then I started thinking about it a little bit more, and then I started thinking more about my younger years, and I liked to sell stuff. I was good at it. I liked to make up things. I was creative. And I think all those years being in financial services, certainly in Canada, they're very conservative institutions. And so everything you're doing is in a framework. It's in a box. These are the rules. You can only go outside the rules this far. And so I think some of my creativity probably had reduced over that time, or it was hidden. And so I wasn't really thinking about everything that I could possibly do. And when I started opening my mind to what if, that's when it kind of all the pieces came together, I would say.
That great question of wouldn't it be great if, and actually starting to imagine without those parameters or paradigms that your industry had, imposed on you in a necessary way, but that had sort of kept you in a certain space until then. So when you were thinking about creating your business, what was most important to you? What sort of things, when you were sitting there with a blank piece of paper in front of you, what were you thinking of when it came to designing how this was going to look and feel and who you were going to serve? What were you thinking of then?
Couple things. So first of all, I really like making a difference in people's lives. Throughout my whole life, I've been an active volunteer, and a lot of my volunteer work has either been with kids, with animals, things like that. And I've done a lot of volunteering in the space of financial literacy. And so I thought if I could incorporate that, that would be great. I loved all of the time I was working with entrepreneurs because I was able to explain things that were complex, but in an easy to understand way. So I knew I had that. And then I took a look around and started trying to figure out really practically, where is the money? Because that's great. I want to have my own business, but I do need to support myself. I'm a one income household. And so I need to get back to my standard of living from my old corporate job. And so money was a big factor. So at the end of the day, I landed on serving young adults, which I consider to be 18 to 30-ish. And people who love them certainly listen to the podcast as well. And certainly entrepreneurs of all ages.
Yeah, and that's great. The concept of recognizing where there is that blend of what it is that you want to create, but where there is actually a market for it. And I think that's a really important balance to get. My experience has been with all the different women that I've worked with and spoken with on this podcast, we need to find the space between contribution and fulfillment. So as you said, you wanted to make a difference. You'd really enjoyed how you could assist people in the past. And that's the contribution piece. The fulfillment piece is, okay, I want to enjoy this. I want to take away those parameters and perhaps the paradigms that were there before. But that incredibly important ingredient, there needs to be me solving a big enough problem in the world that I will be well remunerated for. And that's the piece that third piece that is so essential. How did you go about deciding what the services were that would meet the need within that market?
I did a couple things. As I mentioned, I had supported learning and development with some courses. I did it through course design and certainly facilitated a lot of courses when I was in the bank. And so the first thing I did was try to reach out to people I knew or people who could connect me with educational post-secondary institutions. And so very quickly, I was able to land some courses to teach at McMaster University and Centennial College in a business financial services space. So that was kind of the first piece, like get something under my belt that's new that I can try. And I started with one course at each institution and then it grew. And so now I'm primarily at the college and I'm teaching 3 to 4 courses a semester. So I love that because I'm working every day that I'm there with my young adult group and helping them better understand financial services. The second piece, because I knew that's where I was going to have to be to make up for my corporate income, I do some consulting as well, back to financial institutions. So I called around and was quickly able to secure part-time contract that would be able to sustain me while I was building out the rest of the services. And so then I had a little bit of time to think through what would be the right thing to do. We have a bank for entrepreneurs in Canada called the Business Development Bank of Canada. I also was able to connect with them through a friend who works there, and she was able to get me in their consulting roster. And so through them, I deliver financial management programs to their entrepreneurs directly. So it's really fun. I help them understand their financials. We work through cash flow forecasts, pricing strategies, and it's all within a 3 to 4 month time frame, and then I move on to the next. So building out all the pieces kind of slowly and over time, and I didn't rush in to do it.
And I love how you had those different areas where you were going to be able to bring the income in from, so that multiple streams of income rather than relying on just one area. You reduce your own risk, you spread the risk across there, but it also allows you to build, sustainably, as you were describing. One of the things you said a little earlier was that this isn't easy, this entrepreneurial journey.
No.
And we'll find out about some of those challenges along the way. But 2 things you said that really stood out, I think, is very, very important. There's a strong self-belief that I'm hearing that you have the ability to overcome obstacles. So I think we can take that by looking at our past. And even though we may not have overcome entrepreneurial obstacles, if we can find evidence in our past that we have come up against challenges and found a way through, we can almost transfer that energy into this new venture. And the other piece was that you weren't afraid to ask for help. So what would you say to someone who is sitting there at the moment and going, wow, she made this move? Like, what's the first steps for me to take when it comes to those ideas of the challenges and asking for help?
Well, first thing I would say is you want to get enough of your ideas fleshed out. Not that it's a concrete plan, but that you've got a area or a focus direction. And then I think you want to reach out to a couple people that you really trust, that you believe to have good judgment in your life. So it's important that those people know you and they know what it is that you want to do so they can give you sound advice. So it's not an official thing, but I've got kind of a personal board of advisors. And when I'm struggling with something, I reach out to different people, not always the same person, depends on what it is. And they tell me honestly, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. No, this one's not so good, Tracey. Why don't you see how you can reshape that a little bit? Not that you couldn't do it, but it doesn't seem maybe as aligned with the other things you're trying to do. And I think that it's very important to remember that most people in your life want you to succeed. Mm. You may not hear from them all the time. They may not be present every day. But fundamentally, most people do want to see you succeed. That's your friends, your family, even your colleagues, potentially that you worked with and some other connections in your network. People are generally kind, and if you ask for help, they will try to help you.
I so agree with that at the end of the day, people are inherently kind. We do want each other to succeed. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs and women that are moving into business can hold back. I think isolation is quite a dangerous thing when you're in these establishment phases. Do you feel the same?
Absolutely, especially if you're working out of your home, where you're directly just working with your clients. You don't even have a team yet because you're not big enough to afford to pay other people. And so you get kind of in this warp where you're by yourself and you think it's you against everyone, where it's really, where should I find support? And I think that certainly as women, there's a lot of women's groups out there. If you want support just of women, I think you want to make sure you shop around a little bit and find the right one with the people that fit well with you, because I've been to a lot of women's groups. Some I like, some I don't like, depending on what the activities are and what's going on in those groups. Find people that you fit with and get a couple of advisors that you can trust, and you can always ask them things knowing that they've got your back and they're not going to lead you astray.
Yeah, I think I call them belief buddies. They're those couple of people that they hold your vision in their hand and heart just as much as you do. So you can go backwards and forwards to them. We play the same role for them quite often because they're usually in a similar scenario where they may have their own business, and having that bounce back off each other is really important. What sort of I guess one of the things that comes up a lot with women is the doubt. Is that, can I make this happen? And I know from your description that you've managed to create a very successful business in a fairly short space of time, but that's not always the case. And when we're first moving, there is that doubt that can come up in the back of the mind. What sort of doubts or fears did you have to deal with when you were starting down this journey?
Well, one of the big ones, especially because of how I left my organization, it wasn't personal. It wasn't because I was the bad performer, but my job was eliminated. But that brings with it lots of feelings of embarrassment, of shame, of what are people thinking about me. And so you want to kind of hide out from all those people you knew for all those years. And so you have to get over that if that's your circumstance that you're going into starting it, I think is the first thing. And then when I started reaching out to people again, and they were really excited to see what I was starting to create. But every time you take 2 steps forward, you come up with a roadblock. There's something you don't know how to do. I think it's really important to say that when I was in the bank, I was an expert at some things. And now as an entrepreneur, I'm probably not an expert at anything except my coaching services, because that's my background. But every day I learn new things, or I'm asking somebody how to do something. So I think getting really comfortable with not knowing how to do things has to be part of your makeup. And if that is really paralyzing, I think maybe entrepreneurship is not really the right thing, or not by yourself.
That's a really good point. That idea of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, of being in that space of not knowing and not taking that as like a personal thing, because it's a practical thing. There's skill gaps that we're going to need to learn to close. It was interesting when you said, that feeling of embarrassment and shame, or, what are people thinking of me, which is such an Achilles heel, our concern about other people's judgments of us. And you mentioned that that's something that we clearly need to work through. Was there a particular way that you found yourself tackling that when you're saying that we need to get over it, we need to work through it? There's lots of different ways. There's different modalities you can use. There's, emotional freedom technique. There's CBT. There's so many different ways you can approach it. But what worked for you? Having these, personal interventions with yourself, or what did you find effective?
I felt that the more I stayed alone and stayed isolated, the worse it was. So I really just, as I was going through outplacement services that the organization provided, and I was going to courses with other people in the same position as me and practicing our stories about how we would interview and all of those kinds of things, then I started putting myself back out there with my old colleagues. And I would put myself in situations where I would run into people. And so it just got easier and easier. It took a while, I'm not going to lie. But you have to do it, because if not, you're still thinking 2 years later, what are those people thinking about me? And really probably 1 week after it happened, most of those people were like, oh, I just haven't seen Tracey for a while. Because the way they did the communication, it wasn't transparent to everybody that people were leaving the organization. So
I think that's really important. And it's, I think if we find, or I've found in those scenarios, our thoughts are actually far more scary than the actuality.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I've come to realize that is important for everyone to know is that most people don't think about you as much as you think about yourself. So nobody is spending hours a day thinking about you.
I reckon that's so true. It's actually a conversation I've had with my teenage daughter often as well. It starts young and it continues, and we need to stay on top of it for sure. This idea of taking risks is something that you've mentioned when we've spoken, and in the application for the podcast inquiry as well. And what do you see as taking risks? Like, how do you actually summarize that in terms of a feeling or actions, or what does it mean to you to take risk?
So just as a disclaimer, I am like a professional risk manager. So I do analyze risk for a living. But to me, it really means pushing yourself to do something that doesn't totally feel natural. Something you can see yourself doing, but it kind of makes you feel like your stomach's churning. So you can then analyze the good things, the bad things, and make a calculated decision about, is this a good churning I'm feeling in my stomach, or is this a bad thing? And certainly I don't ever recommend people go into things blindly. I don't think that's a good strategy for managing risk and taking risks. But if you can weigh the good with the bad and know that it's in your realm of possibilities, I think those are good kinds of risks to take.
So it's weighing them up. It's not doing something without too much thought. There's a balance there. So what do you think is one of the more risky things that you've tried in the new business?
Well, certainly starting the business was a huge one. Even just thinking back in my corporate career, when I moved from Toronto to Western Canada, I didn't know anybody. I had just turned 30. I had never even traveled west of the province that I live in. And so it was a huge move. I was joining a group where it was predominantly men, late 50s, early 60s. It could have gone all bad, and it turned out to be such a wonderful experience. So in that moment, I weighed the pros and the cons, made the decision. Same thing when it came to starting the business. And so I would say, even just on a small scale, reaching out to those educational institutions, asking people to connect me, even knowing I don't have any educational credentials other than my experience, but I don't have formal training as a teacher, and coming up with the reasons why I think I'd be a good instructor, a good professor at the front of the room for those students.
So
it
brilliant.
Can be a huge one or it can be a small one, but I think that people take risks every day.
And there's like a cumulative effect that happens, isn't there? It's like the actions of confidence come first and the feelings of confidence sort of follow them. And as you take those small steps and you're still standing, then that momentum builds, that enthusiasm builds, that confidence builds. And then before you know it, you've got the snowball effect.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly first day I went to those classes, I was nervous. I never taught anybody in that kind of situation. And I didn't even know how to make the computer go on, let alone the overhead stuff. So you certainly, you get the thing you want, and then you figure out how to make it happen.
I think that's the mark of someone that is born to be an entrepreneur. When you can have that attitude, that feeling of, okay, I don't know all the things, but I'm going to figure it out. There was that confidence that you took from your earlier roles, that I can figure things out, so I can figure this out as well. So there's a lot of self-talk that needs to happen, isn't there?
Yeah, and one thing that I suffer from tremendously, which I know a lot of women do, is I am a perfectionist. And unfortunately, a lot of my jobs at the bank required a lot of detail, a lot of precision. We were doing a lot of content for very senior audiences and external directors. And so it ratcheted up my perfectionism to like the highest degree. So when I was starting my business, that was something I had to contend with, and I had to deal with, and I had to knock it down quite a few notches. So I had to get more comfortable with, this isn't perfect, but I have to move on. If I don't do this right now, I'm not going to get it out, and it means nobody's going to see it. And so that was a lot of self-talk and a lot of continual work in process, I would say, and that still goes on.
Oh, I think that's a really important one. I definitely come across people who are perfectionists, and not even always overall. It can be in certain areas, and that ability to be able to recognize this could be chapter 1. Okay, it's fine for chapter 1. Next time I'll take it to chapter 2 and I'll improve it then. It's a tricky one sometimes to have those arguments inside your own head, isn't it?
Yes, and I was at probably extreme perfectionism with the roles that I had. So, because that's what was demanded. So to bring yourself out of that when I was already naturally a detail-oriented person is lots of unteachings to do.
Yeah, that's so true. There's a lot of things we have to unlearn when we've had a story in one area in those previous chapters. Here's the things that were most important, and I'm going to take some of those strengths through to this next chapter, but some of them I've actually got to dial down a bit as well. So self-awareness is so important when we're going through this journey, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so another thing I did that may help people as they're trying to think about transitions they want to make is when I was doing those outplacement services after I left the bank, I had them do 360 assessment. So I had them interview my former bosses, my former colleagues, former subordinates, and get kind of a full picture view on me. So I even asked people I knew didn't really care for me. They appreciated my work, but they didn't really care for me. And so I got an unbiased assessment and this report that kind of helped me level set. Okay, these are the things that people think you're good at. These are the things where they think you can improve, so that you could see, does that line up with what I'm thinking? And I knew most of it because I have been working on that for many, many years, but it's a really good place to start. So if you are thinking about doing a business, it's a good way to check out what somebody else thinks are your skill sets or areas you might want to consider. And then you can decide, do you agree with them or you don't agree with them?
That's really good advice, as I think it can be very difficult to be accurate at our own self-assessment. I think often we can underestimate our value and what it is that we can provide, and sometimes, just occasionally, not anywhere near as common, but we can overestimate in some areas as well. So having access to that sort of insight must have been priceless.
Yeah, it was good, and I really appreciate that everybody took the time to participate in that, because I mean I'm gone from the organization. They don't have to. They don't need to spend their time on that. But all of the people cared enough about me and my future development and future plans to take the time to participate.
Do you think for someone that doesn't have access to that sort of more formal assessment, I think you could also create something that obviously won't be quite as professional, but do you believe that it would be possible if you created a system of questions and actually sent it out to people and connections that you did know, that you may be able to get, maybe not quite as unbiased, but you could get a starting point in terms of asking people for observations of your strengths, what you do well, what you think could be improved, etc. Do you think you could do it in that sort of way?
I do, and I think to take it one step further, you could, like we were talking about that personal board of advisors, if you kind of Googled the questions, because I don't think it'd probably be hard to find the questions, but if you entrusted one of them to do the interviewing, I think you would get the most candid feedback, because people are going to be reluctant to tell you things, especially if it's people who don't like you. maybe they like your work, but they don't like you. They don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation with you or even
Oh,
write it down when it goes back to you. So having someone else do it on your behalf, I think you'd get great results as well.
yeah, I think that's a really great point. I do remember this is many years ago, doing this exercise, and yes, it came from you as an individual, but that idea of having the board of advisors representative in the middle was an excellent one to bridge that gap and to make it easier
Mm-hmm.
to be candid.
Well, especially if like you're checking with 2 people at every level, you've got these 6 responses. And if everybody thinks you should improve on this, okay, that's kind of telling. And maybe you didn't know about it. But if it's only one and that person, you're going to pick someone who probably has some knowledge of your prior situation, and that person's going to be able to give some context to it. So it's not just going to come and hit you and you're going to go, oh my gosh, I'm terrible at this. It gives it some context and it's a little bit of a buffer.
Yeah, I think those are helpful, especially when you're in the early days, when there is that tentativeness quite often about the moves that you're making because everything is so new. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
not being smacked back on your butt might be quite helpful.
The other thing too, I would suggest for people who are starting businesses, and if you're not sure what you're going to do, so we had talked about getting kind of an idea, talking to your advisors, but if you've got something that you think would work with a particular market, I think there's no harm, and it's pretty easy to get together small focus groups where you can talk to your target market and see if they would buy what you want to sell them. And I think that's very easy to do early on. People are usually shy to do it, but it gives you lots of great insight.
Yeah, that's really important. It's often I send my clients on what I call coffee dates. So they may start with some individuals and having conversations. And a really good question to ask sometimes is if this is the problem that you're looking to solve, asking the audience in that small focus group or asking the individual, what would be an ideal solution to you? And actually hearing from them how they would go about or what they would see as being the thing that they're most looking for. Because sometimes when we present our findings, we miss the opportunity to hear something new that they may not offer. They may just respond to what we are talking to them about. So I think we can go from both sides there and you can get some really interesting input.
Absolutely. And I did that with some of my things for young adults. And so I had several focus groups with some from different areas and different income levels. And the one thing, though, that was resounding amongst all of them, which was different than I thought, they did want to hear from people like me. So somebody older than them who had experience, who could interview different people and show them things. But equally important was for them to hear from each other, what was working, what wasn't working from a financial standpoint. And so I would never have got that aspect if I hadn't taken the time to do that.
That's a great point. That allows you to really make your offerings more robust when you've heard from the horse's mouth, from the coalface. And that's a great combination, isn't it? That putting together the wisdom of someone who's older and has the experience, but then you also want to look at what's happening right alongside you with your peers. That's a really powerful combination.
The other thing, too, is everyone was saying, well, Tracey, for young adults, you've just got to develop an app, and that's what they want.
Yep.
And I said, well, okay, I'm not sure about that. So then when I did ask them, that wasn't what they wanted. They wanted to be able to, if they were going to do learning in a course setting, they wanted to be able to come together and talk to each other. They didn't want it just on the computer. They didn't want to be isolated. They wanted to have that bonding time.
That's brilliant, because that's that idea of sometimes we can work under assumptions. And we need to be brave enough to challenge those assumptions. And really the only way we can do that is by asking our audience. So,
Absolutely.
and I know this is something that I've certainly experienced as well. And I believe this would be something similar to you, that the purely online learning or the online exposure via an app or via a course, to me, it never feels as fulfilling. It never feels as powerful as when you have that group work, that small group work where you are, in a cohort of peers and you can have that shared experience. That's what really adds the layer. We learn from each other often just as much as we learn from the person at the front of the room.
For sure.
Well, another thing that I was wondering about was the concept of financial fitness. That's a term that you use throughout your business, and it's been a touch point of your life. Could you explain that to us? As someone is understanding the concept, how does it apply to us? How do you see financial fitness play out?
Well, the way I explain it is it's very similar to physical fitness. So if you think about physical fitness, you could be on the couch deciding to start some exercise, you get up and you go around the block for a walk. Or you could be farther down the physical fitness spectrum and you could be training for a marathon. So financial fitness to me is really akin to that. You can be a beginner learning about bank accounts. You can be learning how to make a budget, or you can be at the far right of that financial fitness spectrum and be learning how to do even more sophisticated investing. And I like the way that it frames it because it comes at it from a positive. Sometimes I think with the term financial literacy, there's a negative connotation to it that you don't know. You're illiterate financially, and I think that puts you already in a starting place where you feel bad about what you don't know. So if we're viewing it as financial fitness, it's great wherever you are, and you can take steps every day to improve your level of financial fitness to wherever point you want to go. Everybody's somewhere on that spectrum, and you're going to decide where's the place you want to end up.
I so agree with, I'd never heard it described like that, as the concept of financial literacy has an inherent almost insult within it. If you need it, it's because you've got no skill at the moment at all. And yeah, that puts you almost behind the eight ball in the way that you view yourself. I love that idea of having the analogy to fitness instead, because hey, I'm not a marathon runner, but I can certainly be up and walking around the block. And so that gives me that feeling that I'm already on my way.
Yeah, everybody's on their way to somewhere. Some people are just at a lower activity, and some are at a higher activity, or farther to the right activity, if you will. And certainly in Canada, our schools do not do a good job of educating all under post-secondary students at financial education. Personal finance matters. So they get to post-secondary, university, or college, and the real world is really hitting them in the face, and they're not sure how to do most anything. And it's not their fault. It's also not their parents' fault that they couldn't explain it to them, because probably no one explained it to them. So I think that at every age, if we can teach people something to help them move along that financial fitness spectrum, the better society is going to be.
I couldn't agree more. It's a very similar scenario here in Australia as well. And as parents, my friends and I've often spoken about this. Where's the practicality of the skills to actually handle, yes, the real world once we get out there? I think we need to clone you and get you over here.
Well, certainly with the wonders of the internet, everybody can listen to Young Money, the advice show for young millionaires in the making. And as you mentioned, I just hit 100 episodes. And so certainly my weekly show is always looking for content and for topics. So if anybody's got show ideas or they want to be a guest, then feel free to reach out.
I'll certainly make sure that we've got that link within the show notes as well. And I'll put my son onto it, who is in his third year down at uni. And we have financial conversations with him. It's really important. And there's different books that I've given him, but with the way in which he interacts online, getting in his little Apple earbuds and sticking them in his ears and having a listen to your show makes perfect sense. So I'll make sure I pass that one on as well.
Well, Tracey, he might like to be a future guest, him and some of his friends.
Absolutely. He has no problems with talking. He's a bit of a chip off the old block.
That's great.
So, Tracey, this has been one of those conversations that has taken us all through these different areas of where you've come from, where you're going to, how it is that you got started, those roadblocks, and that really positive philosophy that you have, where we've carried through that belief from your ability to move through obstacles in the past, that you can certainly apply that same experience to building the business that you have today. So what I'd love to know is, what do you enjoy? What is the thing that really lights you up in the fact that you now have your own business and the impact that you're making with the people you work with? What is it that you sit there at the end of the day and go, that was a great day?
The biggest thing for me is when I'm able to help someone. And so that could mean today I help someone actually understand how their financial statements work and what that means to them practically when they're managing their money in their firm. Most entrepreneurs, they manage their spending and their investment activity by what's in my bank account. And so if I can move people off that, that's really great. I would say a lot of times our consultations, there's tiers, men or women, and not necessarily in a bad way. Sometimes they're feeling overwhelmed. And then by the time we're done working together, there's usually hugs and tears because they've learned so much and they feel empowered. So it's always a good day for me when somebody feels like they know more than when we started talking.
It's a beautiful vision to have of taking somebody from that overwhelming feeling into the empowerment. I think if any of us have a desire within our businesses, it's usually linked in around that feeling of certainly making a difference, of empowering somebody to take control or to show up more strongly in their life in different ways. And then we've got that third piece that you said, which was so important at the beginning, that to be well compensated for the value that we provide to the world. And it sounds like that triangle is working beautifully for you.
Well, thank you. And certainly a lot of the women that I know who are doing their own thing here, and a lot of the men too. Lots of times I remind people that you cannot help others if you don't take care of yourself. So if you're not making money, why are you doing it? You got to tweak your idea. And I'm pretty disciplined on that, and I'm pretty direct. So I'm the kind of coach who's going to tell you the way it is from a place of love and wanting to help you. But I have no qualms telling my friends as well, because we spend a lot of our time doing the work that we do. And as entrepreneurs, we work a lot of our lives. So we want to make sure that we're being compensated for what we do. And then that allows us to help more people, whether it's with our time, whether we do financial donations or whatever it may be. But you can certainly help a lot more people once you're financially set.
You certainly can. I agree with that one 110%. Well, Tracey, for people who want to find out more about you and your work in the world, where is the best place to connect with you?
Best place would be on my website, so bissettfinancialfitness.com, and you can certainly feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. I'll make sure those links are available for you as well. Wonderful. Well, thank you again for spending your time here with us today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Angela. It's been a really fun conversation.
Fantastic. And to you, my lovely listener, I hope as you've listened to this conversation, you've heard how possible it is to move from a situation that didn't feel so great at the start, in Tracey's scenario, where she was no longer working in those institutions that she'd been in for quite some time, but it opens the doorway to a new possibility. Occasionally, you need that catalyst. In Tracey's instance, her dad suggested, why not start it for yourself? And sometimes those catalyst conversations can open that new door that you can step through into. As we've said today, it's not always easy, but if you can become comfortable with that feeling of, I don't know everything, and that's okay. Keep moving forward. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I love the idea of having your own small board of directors to help you just navigate these first steps into your next chapter, and the way in which you then yourself may take those new clients in the future from overwhelmed into that sense of empowerment. We all want our businesses to make a contribution, but those feelings of fulfillment, of making that difference, as well as being well compensated for it, are possible for you. So I encourage you, just like Tracey and so many other women that you have heard on this podcast, just take that first step today. There's a whole new chapter waiting for you. So until next time, thank you for listening, and I'll be back with you again very soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Your Next Chapter podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd love you to share it, perhaps leave a review in iTunes, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're looking for your own business breakthrough at the moment, then I've got something special for you. Visit angelarasmus.com/breakthrough guide. That e-guide takes you through the 4 key gaps to close that may be stopping you from reaching the next level in your business. I hope it's extremely helpful, and I look forward to talking with you again on the next episode.